What's up, folks? Looking forward to giving you a greater understanding of the available research that is available to any and all of us, including medical physicians, myself, you, parents, everyone. But I do want to go through this in very much a great amount of detail due to the fact that I'm going to be able to show you, and you'll be able to see it for yourself, how bias amongst researchers can create the illusion of safety when it comes to vaccinations. Without a shadow of a doubt, in my mind, when you read the evidence and you look at the science that says vaccines are not associated or do not cause asthma or do not cause eczema or allergies, you can see very quickly when you look at the actual data, when you look at the ways in which they came to their conclusions of no association, but yet their data shows an association, you see the bias there. And you can ultimately see that the vaccines are causing a problem. In the future, I'll go through studies on measles. Studies on measles have actually shown that natural measles infection reduces the risk of certain allergic atopic diseases like eczema. Meanwhile, vaccinations have been associated and found to be associated with eczema and allergies and asthma. So we're going to be going through this research study here in detail. Looking forward to that. I'm going to try and keep myself calm and just be able to go through it in a matter-of-fact manner. But you have to take into consideration, I am the wild doc and I kind of get fired up at times. So here we go. Folks, just pay attention, stay with me on this. This is one study I'm going to be reviewing for you, but I did want to get you some background just to put this in perspective before we go into the study of DTP or DTaP vaccine and allergy and eczema, and then also the MMR vaccine. They study it in its reference to whether it's associated with asthma. Here are some statistics in the United States. Due to asthma every day in America, we have 40,000 children or individuals miss school or work. We have 30,000 people who have an asthma attack. We have 5,000 people who have to visit the emergency room, and 1,000 people are admitted to the hospital every single day. And think about this, folks. 11 people die every single day because of asthma. And that's asthma alone. That's not including the other condition of eczema or allergies. Allergies are associated with an increased risk of suicide and other illnesses, infectious diseases, as well as death rates. So, but this is asthma alone. If you took asthma alone and you look at that, the decline of infectious diseases, even if we were to say was because of vaccines, which I do that in other research reviews and things like that, you'll know that it's not because of vaccines. Measles was on the decline, mortality had already declined. I mean, you can literally say every year is 40,000 hospitalizations. Well, 40,000 people miss work or school. 5,000 people go to the emergency room every day, and 1,000 people. In 40 days, asthma tops what measles was doing prior to the vaccine even being available. Put that into perspective. 11 people die in the United States every single day because of asthma. And if a vaccine, such as the MMR vaccine or the DTaP vaccine, if these vaccines cause this illness, which the evidence gives us the ability to say, yes, they do, the science is there to prove causality, prove that the vaccines are causing these problems. When we have biological mechanisms, you'll see that in this study that I review, and you also see that there's an association on a population-based evaluation of those vaccinated, not vaccinated, again and again within the research studies. So 11 people dying, that is way more. That is way more than measles was killing prior to the time period in which we started vaccinating against measles. Take that into consideration. So you have to see the harms when you judge benefits and risks. You can't say a vaccine is safe and effective if the evidence shows that it contributes to a condition that is killing 11 people per day. What percentage of the population is suffering with asthma just because of a vaccine, just because they are vaccinated? We can't put our finger exactly on that number or that percentage, but even if it was, let's say, 10%, we would still be killing more people than measles would be if we had no vaccinations at all. So I'm going into the research study here. This is available to you. If TWD in the links or the comments here on Facebook, you will get the link to this study. Get the whole study, read the whole study, because if you just read the abstract. So if you go to PubMed, and you can get this off of PubMed, Vaccination and Allergic Diseases, a Birth Cohort Study. This is published in 2004, American Journal of Public Health. So I want to show you this, folks. Did I click on? There it is. All right, so let's look at what their conclusions in the abstract. And this is what I see a lot of people who are pro-vaccine do. And I'll even see some people gloss over these studies and not read them because in the quote anti-vaccine or the negativity towards vaccination group or the ex-vaxxers, reading this and knowing what these studies say can really give us the platform and opportunity to teach people and even show people. I love using a study like this to show somebody who is questioning vaccines and show them that I want you to see the way in which the research community thinks about vaccines, how they literally have an idolatry towards vaccines, how they will not say a vaccine is bad. They will do whatever is necessary to come to the quote conclusion that vaccines are safe and not associated with a deadly disease. Folks, if vaccines weren't around and measles was just going about infecting 3, 4, 5 million people a year, prior to the vaccine, the average mortality rate in the 4 years prior to the vaccine even being available, which was 1959 to 1962, those 4 years, 59, 60, 61, 62, the average mortality rate, the average number of people dying was 401.75 people. That's all. Now that sounds like a lot, 400 people, if we could save their lives, thank God for that. But if we're implementing an intervention like a vaccine that increases the odds of a child developing asthma, which again, 11 people in America die every day because of asthma, and the rates of death and mortality from that condition and the total rates of that condition have gone up since the 1960s, 70s, and on, in conjunction with the rising rates of vaccinations. Taking that into consideration, we are literally seeing a devastating effect by vaccination. Watch this. All right, I want to show you the conclusions. Our data, this is a statement by these researchers. They say that their data suggests the current recommended routine vaccinations are not associated or not a risk factor for asthma or eczema. They say their data, and I highlight specifically data because no, your data actually showed, and they admit that when you read the entire study, you will find that their data showed massive increases in the odds of a child developing atopic dermatitis, eczema, allergies, and asthma. So let's actually read the study. I want to point out that it's well known right now that there is a quote unexplained, and this is one of the things that should get everybody. Now, this is where I'm going to get a little heated. This is what medicine says. They will say there's an unexplainable rise in the rates of chronic illnesses in our children, from autism to asthma to Crohn's disease, to diabetes, all these conditions now affecting our children, these immunological, autoimmune type immune system regulatory problems. That's what they are. But vaccines, something that stimulates the immune system, something that skews, that causes an alteration in what natural immunity and natural infection would do, vaccines that cause a problem with our immune system, they couldn't be the cause of this unexplainable rise in these chronic illnesses. But again, they say an unexplained increase in the prevalence of allergic disease has occurred in the developing world in the past few decades. During the same period, there has been an increase in mass immunizations. Now, one of the excuses I hear from individuals who are very pro-vaccine, they say, well, all those children that have asthma today, they would have been dead because of measles and these other infectious diseases. You can't say that asthma has a higher mortality rate than measles did. That's not logical. So, going on here, there is evidence that pertussis vaccine enhances humans' response to histamine and leads to raised immunoglobulin E levels. Immunoglobulin E levels are something they measure for people to objectively, not subjectively. If you subjectively diagnose somebody with eczema or you subjectively diagnose them with asthma, you're just looking at their You're looking at their symptoms. That's subjective. Objective evidence would be doing like a blood test. So with the IgE, they can measure the blood and look at allergic immune responses, and they can see that somebody has an allergic illness, allergic disease like eczema or an allergy to a substance. So if we understand that pertussis vaccinations have been found to increase and can lead to the development of immunoglobulin E levels being elevated, as well as increased histamine responses or sensitivity to histamine, well, what do we find in the literature? Asthma and eczema and allergic diseases are being caused biologically by that right there. So now you have biological plausibility, a biological explanation through the research and science that shows a vaccine causes the biological response within the human body that leads to the diagnosis as well as the development and suffering of individuals with asthma and eczema. So going on, there's biological plausibility there, biological explanation for why vaccines cause this problem. Evidence to date has both supported and refuted the association between vaccination and allergic diseases. It is clearly important. Pay attention to this statement and think about the wording here. This is the researchers. Think about someone speaking in this manner. It is clearly important to gain a detailed understanding of the relationship between vaccinations and allergic disease, because a perception that vaccination is harmful may have an adverse impact on the effectiveness of immunization programs. Think about that. So who do they care about? Right there, those researchers are speaking from their heart or their mind, but they're speaking loudly to us all. What are they concerned about? They are concerned more about the adverse impact to the immunization program. They're more concerned with the adverse impact of less sales for the pharmaceutical companies. They're more concerned about the adverse appearance. They're more concerned about the truth getting out to people that vaccines are devastating and deadly. They don't want somebody to have a negative, vision, an idea about vaccinations. They're not, you know what? If these researchers were truly, in their spirit and heart, wanted the best for children, this statement would have read. It is clearly important to gain a detailed understanding of the relationship between vaccinations and allergic diseases, because if vaccines cause unnecessary suffering, illness, and cause such diseases as allergic diseases or asthma, that could potentially mean that we're doing children more harm by the vaccine program. They should have said something like that if their heart was in the right place. They shouldn't be concerned about a program. They should be concerned about the lives of children, especially when their evidence, their data showed clearly vaccines increase the risk of a deadly condition. Goes on here, we calculate rates of disease from the end of the exposure period, which we defined arbitrarily as the age at which 95% of children have received their third injection of DPPT. Now, DPPT is diphtheria, pertussis, polio, and tetanus vaccine. But again, biological plausibility is that the pertussis component of the DPT or DTaP vaccine can cause increased histamine sensitization as well as IgE. So it has those biological reasons for causing allergies and asthma. They go on. Okay, they had to have their third injection of that vaccine, the DPPT, or they had to get their first MMR vaccine. Okay, subjects diagnosed with an allergic disease or lost to follow-up before this time were excluded from the analysis. What's the important thing about that? You need to understand when reading research is that if they remove people, so let me explain this way. So a child to be included in the analysis had to have received all of their diphtheria, pertussis, polio, and tetanus vaccines. All of them, all three. All right, they had to receive all of those vaccines or at least one MMR vaccine. Or they were excluded. So if a child developed eczema or developed asthma after their first diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, polio vaccine, guess what? They were excluded from the analysis. They were not included any longer. So if a child's risk of developing, do you understand the bias that can be brought into this study and into this analysis? If one vaccine is all it takes to cause asthma in a child, one vaccine, one DPT vaccine, one diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, polio vaccine was all it took to cause one child to develop asthma or allergies, well, that child was excluded from the study. They weren't included in the analysis. They had to remain healthy until they got their third vaccine to be included in the analysis. That biases the results strongly in favor of showing a reduced risk of asthma and eczema due to vaccinations. Hopefully everybody understands that. That's how we have to understand research better than most medical physicians. Our univariate analysis showed that exposure to DPPT was associated with an increased risk of developing asthma and eczema. So there you have it. Their analysis of their data showed an increased risk of developing asthma and eczema. But in the conclusions, they said their data didn't. It's doublespeak, folks. Say one thing and then just hope that nobody will read further than their conclusions in their abstract. It became clear that there was a strong association between DPPT and asthma in the lowest quartile consulting frequency. Realize that one of the things they did is they broke this study up into sections, into groups. So children, they're broken up into how many times did they go to their doctors. It's important to understand that because in their excuse, in their discussion, when they come up with their excuse of why they said in their conclusions in their abstract that vaccines don't cause asthma and allergies or weren't associated with asthma and allergies, you have to realize that it was a massive increased risk, massive increased association in the lowest quartile of frequency visits. I'm going to let people think about that before I give you the answer to why that biases and that excuse is extremely faulty. The effects showed a similar pattern for eczema as well as asthma. For MMR, the univariate analysis showed a strong association for MMR vaccination risk of asthma, eczema, but again, this association was confined to children in the lowest consulting frequency. Again, lowest consulting frequency. We found an association between MMR and DPPT vaccination in the incidence of asthma and eczema. All right, they found an association. So their data showed. Now here we get to the discussion and the excuses. This limited association is more, it wasn't limited, it was a massive association. What they mean by limited here is limited to the lowest quartile of frequency visits. So children that went to doctors less frequent were the ones who were vaccinated, were the ones who were sick. So because vaccinated or unvaccinated children didn't go to doctors frequently, well then we're just not finding out that they have asthma and eczema. Limited association is more likely as a result of bias than a biological effect, but the reality is that is a contradicting statement. They said in the beginning of their study, they said that they have a biological plausible reason why children would have eczema, why children would have asthma, was because increased histamine, increased IgE, immunoglobulin E levels in children who get the whooping cough, the pertussis vaccine. So if they get the pertussis vaccine, which is including the DTaP vaccine, the DPT vaccine, the DPPT vaccine, you now have a biological reason why these children would come down with and develop these immunological distorted illnesses, asthma and eczema. So they give you a biological reason why they have the problem, they would have the problem after because of vaccines. And then they say this association, which is massive, it's not it's likely not a biological effect, but they explain how it's again doublespeak. But this is again what we're dealing with in the medical community. They have such an idolatry for vaccinations. They worship vaccines. It's their sacred cow. they never would want to shine a negative light on vaccines, despite how much harm and how many children die from conditions that the evidence, the data shows is caused by vaccines. Children who are not taken to the doctor are less likely to be vaccinated and also have less opportunity to have a diagnosis of allergic disease recorded. It said only in children who rarely consult physicians was the data. Think about this. They broke it up into categories. A few visits, and here we can go to them in just a second. But children in the lowest frequency of visits. So if you were somebody who chose not to vaccinate your child, you go to doctors less frequently. Well, who's going to go to the doctor more often? Think about how bad of an excuse this is. They say children who are not taken to the doctor are less likely to be vaccinated and also have less opportunity to have a diagnosis of allergic disease recorded. Who needs a physician? I go to the Bible. You don't need a physician. Only the sick, the healthy. They're not in need of a physician. They don't go to doctors. Who's going to go to doctors more frequently? Sick children with eczema and allergies and asthma, or healthy children, unvaccinated, who have no reason to go to the doctor? So healthy children don't go to doctors. Sick children go to doctors more frequently for their pills, their drugs, and their vaccines. Parents who have a healthy child don't just go to the doctor and say, hey, we want to stop by and say hi. Our child's been doing great. No wheezing, no breathing problems, no skin rashes. But I wanted to ask you, could you look at them real quickly and just make sure they don't have asthma? I've never seen them have a breathing problem. I've never seen them break out in a horrible rash like eczema and deal with this massive itching problem. You know, can you please check them out for me? I want to make sure that I'm not missing something as a parent. Am I being a bad parent? I mean, my child isn't wheezing, breathing problem, nothing. And supposedly, us anti-vaxxers are sitting at home with these children. I mean, it's horrible. I mean, I had a best friend almost die from asthma who was vaccinated as a child. Almost die from asthma. I was literally the fastest kid in school. I can remember this today. In the back of the baseball diamond, out there playing kickball, and my buddy drops to the ground, can barely breathe, having an asthma attack. And my coach, our gym teacher, looks at me and says, Dale, go get his inhaler. And literally the locker number's this, go get his inhaler. And I went sprinting. I don't think I've ever ran as fast as I possibly could. I think I got back there with his inhaler, literally having like a breathing attack myself. I fall on the ground, literally falling and throwing him his inhaler. Children die from this. And they're thinking us anti-vaxxers are sitting at home with our children gasping for air, and we're saying, hey, suck it up, son. You're not going to the doctors. We're anti-vaxxers. We're horrible parents. We keep our sick children at home. These researchers are blinded, or they are doing it purposefully in an attempt to cover up the reality of harm from vaccinations. I don't know which one they're doing. They're the ones who are going to have to confess to that someday. Sick children go to doctors more often. This is probably the most important thing you understand throughout this entire video. Sick children go to doctors more frequently. Thus, healthy children don't go to doctors. Thus, that is why you see vaccinated children who are sick more often in the doctor's office more often, and you see less visits in the unvaccinated children. And here's another thing. Think about it. Parents who go to medical physicians and don't vaccinate their child, their child's healthy, they don't need drugs, they don't need inhalers, they don't need these treatments, so they don't need to go any extra visits outside of their well baby visits, their well child visits. But what do you think those parents are going to do? Think about this, researchers. Eventually a parent's going to figure out, you know what? I'm going to these well baby visits, getting the 2-month checkups, the
4-month, the 6, I don't even know what times they are. I'm going to the 1 year, I'm going to all these checkups, and I keep getting hassled by this doctor to vaccinate my healthy child. Why do I want to keep going just to get stressed out and hassled about not vaccinating my healthy child? You know what? I'm just going to quit going. That's the reality of what's taking place. So they use that against us to conceal the reality that vaccines are causing it, because they just throw it all out. They say this is a massive increased risk of asthma and eczema because in those people who got their children vaccinated, in these children who are vaccinated, they have an increased risk. But we're going to throw out all the data and we're just going to make up an excuse. Oh, well, we just can't diagnose a child that never comes to the doctor, or comes to the doctor less frequently, as if parents and doctors are missing out on, yeah, I'm sorry I missed that eczema diagnosis. You don't bring them to me frequently enough for me to diagnose. Going on here with the research here, Kemp, a researcher that examined 1,265 children born in 1977, followed them for an annual examination. Only 23 children had not received routine vaccinations. None of those children had a recorded allergic diagnosis. The authors concluded that this finding was evidence for an association between allergic disease and vaccinations, although their results showed no statistical significant relationship. So the reality is this study, mentioned in the study that I'm reviewing here, they want to throw this one out and say there was no statistical significance because there was such a small number of unvaccinated that you'd have to have a larger number of unvaccinated children, and still all of them could have no allergic diseases or asthma, but we're going to throw it out because your number is too small. The group, and that is science, but yet that is still an indicator that you need to do a bigger and better study of vaccinated versus unvaccinated children, and then you're going to see the truth, which studies like that have been conducted. There's been multiple studies looking at larger populations with enough children in to have a statistically significant association between vaccines, allergic diseases, asthma, and other illnesses. So they've repeated the study that they're mentioning here. But that's how they throw it out in some instances, is they say we just couldn't find enough unvaccinated children that go to doctors frequently enough to be diagnosed with these illnesses. We're just going to throw the results out. Here's the actual data. Crude unadjusted association between the DPPT non-vaccinated as a reference point of 1. So vaccinated were 9.4. 9.4 hazard ratio compared to 1. So in essence, we've got about a 900% increase, 9 times the risk in unvaccinated, or 9 times the risk in vaccinated children of having what? This one looked at the crude adjusted effects of vaccination with DPPT MMR on the incidence of eczema. So this one was on eczema. So 9 times the risk. And then after adjusting for consulting frequency, even after they adjusted for that, what'd they find? A 7-fold increase, 7.5 risk. Stratified out through the consulting frequencies, children who have been 0 to 3 times to their doctor, it was a 15.8 times the risk of being diagnosed with asthma or eczema in this situation. Eczema alone in this one. And then it was less because 4 to 6, 7 to 8, it came down to 1.67, which would be an increased risk, 2.6, and actually I said wrong. If you have 1, you'd have to minus 1. So it wouldn't be a 15 times or it wouldn't be a 9 times. It would basically be minus 1 from all those numbers. You would still have an increased risk. So you would have an 8.4 times the increased risk, a 6.5 times the risk, a 14.8 times the risk. You would have a 0.67 times the risk, 0.6. You'd have a 60% or 67%. You can see, or a 2 point, that was 2.67. So you guys can get the study, you can get all these numbers exactly. I don't have to go through and just go through every single number. Here is for asthma alone. So looking at it crude, looking at just raw data, not adjusting it, all right, we saw 14 point versus 1. So that's 13 times. You look at the adjusted for consulting frequency, they then still saw roughly 10.3 hazard ratio going on. In the adjusted frequency, adjusted or stratified out per frequency, 11.5 for the lowest, 0 to 3 frequency of visits, 4 to 6 visits, they saw 4 times or 3 times. 1 to 4 ratio. Folks, and then again, like I said, parents are going to say, I don't want to keep taking my children. So you just look at those numbers. Their data showed very clearly massive increases in risks of asthma and eczema in children who are vaccinated over children who are not vaccinated. And parents don't want to go and get hassled by their doctor to vaccinate. So they're not just going to keep going for no reason. They're not going to go any extra visits. And they're going to stop at some point if they feel like they're being harassed to vaccinate their healthy children, so then they're just not going to go back anymore. They don't need to go 18 times because they don't need to go constantly to get a prescription refill. In a study here, they mention 2 researchers reported in a study found a weak positive association between the pertussis vaccination and the development of allergic diseases. In our study, the relationship remained significant after we controlled for consulting. So even controlling for consulting, they still found it, even though they make up the excuse. That's my point here. I'm reading you specific things that I think are important things that if you want to find the study, highlight the same things that I have highlighted. That way you can have a discussion with your legislators, you can have a discussion with your friends, and show them all of this. Show them the truth. Help them see through the deception in the studies. All right, this individual, he demonstrated a positive association between measles vaccination and allergic diseases. These investigators found that children who were not immunized with MMR had a decreased risk of allergic skin sensitization. The relation that was shown could have owed to an aspect of the anthroposophic lifestyle. So that's more of a natural lifestyle. In one of the studies I say, it was kind of, we could say that they were farming community, they were children, they were homeschooled, that's what they're talking about in this relationship. They're saying, well, it may not be that they didn't vaccinate their children, it may be that they raised them naturally. They don't use antibiotics, they don't use fever reducers, they don't use vaccines, in that lifestyle of integrating in healthier foods. They mentioned this in another study, and that's what they're referring to. This more natural lifestyle could be why the children have it. And yes, I would agree, a more natural lifestyle, avoiding, and I would agree that you can cause allergies, you can cause problems. You see results of studies on the use of Tylenol and fever reducers. Those children have an increased risk of asthma, increased risk of allergies. And then you see antibiotics have an increased risk of food allergies and different things like that because it destroys our immune system. Those kill the good and the bad, even if they may save a life in an emergency situation. Thank God for that. But the reality is antibiotics destroy our immune system. They destroy our gut, and we got to rebuild that if that occurs. So I do want to throw that out there that if you want help in rebuilding your children's health because you've vaccinated, because you've used fever reducers, you want to know more about that, watch my other videos on thewilddoc.com. You know what? Like us on YouTube and do all that stuff. Or if you need consulting and you need help, just give us a call. You can contact us. So that's what they're referring to there. In a journal, the Journal of American Medical Association, so a letter was written in the Journal of American Medical Association by researchers, presented results from a cross-sectional study that suggested that immunized children were more likely to develop asthma. The authors were unable to find confounding factors to explain this finding. So these researchers in this one that even wrote a letter basically calling for, we need to look at this, we need to pay attention to this. There is accumulating evidence showing that vaccines are causing harm to children. They are causing a more deadly condition known as asthma that is more deadly than any of these infectious diseases would be today. So they say that, but they could not find an excuse. Now watch. In light of our results, are you guys throwing the slides up on the show? So they literally say the authors of the original study couldn't come up with an excuse. They could not find confounding factors to explain their findings of an increased risk of asthma in immunized children. So the researchers of the study we're currently reviewing said, in light of our results, which were positive, which reinforced that association, In light of our results, many of the positive findings of previously published studies could be explained by an ascertainment bias. So literally these researchers, the researchers of the study that I'm going through right now said, well, we see all these other research studies showing a positive association, an increased risk of asthma in children who are immunized. And these people and these other researchers couldn't come up with an excuse. So here, we'll come up with an excuse for them. This is not science, folks. It may be published in a scientific journal, but what these people, these scientists are doing is nothing but bias. This is unscientific reasoning. This is illogical. Ill, get it? Okay, sorry. And it's making children ill. They're illogical excuses for a massive increase in the risk of asthma and eczema, allergic diseases and asthma, is causing children to suffer with illnesses throughout their lifetime. And many are dying. Must I remind people, 11 people die in America every day from asthma. That is far deadlier of an illness. Even if, this is something I want you to think about. Let's say that even though measles had declined by 90 to 99%, the mortality rate declined, before a vaccine was available in 1963, even if we stayed at roughly 400 people dying from measles every year to this day, that wouldn't happen. But let's theoretically say it did. That is like 1/10 the deaths that we are seeing currently today due to asthma. And vaccines cause asthma. Although our results in an observational cohort study demonstrated a positive association between vaccination and allergic disease, even though our results showed that we're harming children, let me rephrase it for them, this association can be explained away by ascertainment bias. This massive association of harm to our children, we can just throw an excuse at it and no one will ever judge vaccines negatively because of it. These data, together with other published evidence, suggest that current vaccination practices do not have an adverse effect on the incidence of allergic diseases. Their data showed. They cannot say their data didn't show. They would have to be true scientists, they would have to say the data showed an increased risk of allergic diseases like asthma and eczema. But we came up with an excuse. And you know what they say about excuses? I'm not going to repeat it. Folks, that's the study review right there. Hopefully that equips you with an understanding of how to read research studies, how to see through their bias, see through their eyes, and see what they're really doing, how they're hiding the reality of vaccines are killing children. Folks, that's all I have for you today. If you haven't, like us on Facebook, TWD in the comments here on Facebook. That only works in Facebook. If you're on YouTube in the future, when we post this on YouTube, you can go to the description of this video and you can get the link to the blog post that will give you the link to the PubMed peer-reviewed literature study that I'm referencing and going through with you. I hope this equips more people with the capability of being able to speak truth in the lives of people and parents before they make the wrong decision of vaccinating their children, causing their child to suffer a vaccine injury, develop an allergic disease, or develop asthma. Because those conditions right now are killing way more people today than measles ever was prior to the vaccine. We have got to get the truth out to people. That's why I do these videos. I hope you're blessed with this information. If you want to support me in this cause and getting this information out to people, we do have a link, Ashley, don't we, in the... Yep, she's putting the link out there on Facebook right now if you want to help support the cause. Or if you want assistance with your health and you want to go about it a natural way, you want to raise your children the right way, the natural way, the God's way, which is not the use of pharmaceuticals, pharmakeia, and drugs. I know I'm probably getting some people fired up and riled up. They're like, I see this guy's trying to sell his elixirs and potions. Yeah, because they work and they're not deadly like your drugs. So I want to help y'all. I appreciate y'all. Love y'all. Spread the truth. Share the truth on Facebook. Hit the share right now because that's the only way we're going to save lives. If all you do is like this video, you are not helping us spread the message to more parents, because this message doesn't need to be just in the hands of people who already are awakened to the truth in reality that vaccines are killing children. It needs to be in the hands of parents that are yet to find out the truth. All right, everybody, share the truth. Don't just like it. It's the only way we save lives. Love y'all.